Told you. Like, peace out.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I think we are live streaming right now. Let me just verify some things here. Ken, how are you? Yeah,
You're just
good
gonna
on
call
YouTube.
me out here, aren't you, on this show?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to take up half the screen, you have to participate.
That's why I went off the screen, and you just purposely called me out to bring me back on here.
Well, welcome back, everybody. This is the Creative Economy. These we're just having our office hours, so we're mostly going to chit chat. However, there was a couple of things that came up, Ken, that I thought were interesting, and since we're not having our show this week, it may be interesting to talk about. Do you remember Martin Wall? Oh man,
Yeah,
you remember Martin
from Garden,
from Music X, which was his blog. His partner, I believe his name is Boss, had an interesting article talking about sort of like the migration of fandoms.
Mm-hmm.
And he made some points in here, but it's interesting because I didn't personally. His main point was that fandoms, like I think he was sort of building a case that fandoms sort of stay in the platform that they're in. And I found that kind of a curious idea because I feel like we're moving to where the fandoms live around the creator, not like around the creator on the platform, right? Like, so the creator as platform versus the social platforms that exist historically.
So,
and I was just curious, it struck me as interesting that someone was sort of making the case. His point was like largely, which I saw another very well-known sort of crypto coin holder and investor sort of make this point, which is that everyone shouldn't just be diving into Web3, right? Like, the reality is that people will kind of get there when they get there, and it's not an appropriate thing for everybody else. And so there's just been a lot of this talk coming up lately, and I don't know, it just seems like an interesting topic.
Well, I mean, it is an interesting topic, and I think the thing that, and I think this is probably some soul searching that creators and builders have to think about when they get into these things. I think the common thing, like, for example, I guess in a more Web 1.0 example, is like, I want to redesign my website, right? I don't have the know-how right now.
You're talking literally about you want to redesign, like you do want to?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's like, I think this is, I like taking, I guess, more from a personal standpoint. For me, it's like, I want to redesign my website. Back in the day, it was I used like Dreamweaver. It's like use a WYSIWYG, right? And there was I was able to had more freedom to really toy around with doing the like the coding, like the HTML, CSS, those type of things. And then I was like, okay, well, it's been stagnant for years, and so, but I needed something that had a little bit more scalability, that was more responsive for these new platforms. And so I went with Weebly, right? And I looked at Weebly versus Wix versus Squarespace, based on what the templates and blah blah blah. And now you look at what's going on now with, like, oh, maybe I want to incorporate this, or I want to be able to have it be, I guess, quote unquote, future proof, and be able to build stuff. And I think there's a sense of ownership in being able to do it yourself. But the thing is, as you're planning the specs for that type of stuff, you're like, oh, what if I had this type of stuff, or this type of feature, and many of those features are all going to be shiny objects, right? And it's like, oh, what if I was able to integrate with like with my Google Calendar, or maybe integrate with this or that, or whatever the flavor of the week is. And I think in a very roundabout way, that's kind of what's maybe builders or entrepreneurs are coming to or have to deal with, because they're like, oh, okay, I want to build something for the creator economy, or I want to build something for my audience, but then everyone's talking about Web3. Right. And so you have to just throw everything in there and say, hey, we're now Web3, we're decentralized, we're blockchain, crypto, blah, 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 without really getting to the heart of, like, and thinking strategically, what the hell are you actually, why the hell are you actually doing this? It's like, I want to be able to build a platform for creators, right? And have them own this stuff. And so, but the best answer is Web3. It's like, are you really thinking is Web3 going to solve that problem, right? I mean, because it could be a hybrid approach, right? I mean, maybe you take it into different steps and kind of adapt people, because I think there's maybe some skepticism from people. Like, I don't really like the vision of owning your own audience is great, but the path to get from where you are now to there is a long and bumpy road. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, so I think there are multiple layers of ownership, sort of, I guess, involved, right? I think, for example, like if you think about quote unquote whatever ownership means, I think it's sort of like identification is sort of seems to me to be the top of the funnel in that exercise. Like, who are my fans or followers, right? Then there's the relationships, and these things can happen sort of semi like in different layers, right? I guess, right? Because, like, for example, you've got 100,000 followers on Twitter. Do you know who they are? And in Twitter, it's a fairly accessible API. You can like drag through, pull out all the handles, use full contact, reconcile all those handles back to emails or as best they can. And you would technically have the identification of who those people are, right? Most platforms provide some visibility into that. But again, like, you'd have to be a developer, or someone would have to create a tool for you to do that thing, right? And those probably are good tools to exist anyway, right? The second part to me, though, is sort of the relationship, right? Like, AKA, you can have, like, let's say I reconciled your email from your Twitter handle. If I were to just mail you, it maybe come as a surprise. Like, you didn't get permission for that email per se, right? Like, you have it. So there's still a little bit of a, like, the relationship has sort of not been granted or established per se. Like, not that, like, you may follow people, like, especially like on Twitter, for example, you may follow any number of people, and you don't have a relationship with them, or they may have forgotten that they follow, right? Like, and so, like, you still need to kind of like reestablish the relationship, right? As the sort of that secondary part of sort of owning your audience, right? And then I think the third part, or I'm just making this up on the fly, but I think the third part feels to me like activation, right, of that audience, of that relationship, right? Like, so it's one thing to have a relationship; it's a second thing to use it, right? Like, so can I use it to drive people to a certain place? Can I use it to, help people accomplish certain things? Can I use it to create new opportunities for myself? Like, whatever it may be. All of those things sort of have to happen, right? Because, like, these things aren't all free per se, right? Like, and we need to sort out how they would happen for us to get to the point that they do happen.
Oh yeah. I think, somebody had posted into our Slack channel. I think it was maybe Abhinav. Oh no, what is it? Yeah, it was Abhinav. It's like, if you're a creator, you don't need to pay. Somebody he shared a tweet. If you're a creator, you don't need to pay attention to Web3. You don't need to go all in or even use it. Simply be aware of what's happening and build a stronger community. There is no world where this does not benefit everyone involved. I think that's the thing where we are, and kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, we are caught up in this shiny object type of mentality, right? When you see these type of new technologies, and you feel very inclined to, like, there's this artificial inclination to want to adapt that into your thing, right? But I think or entrepreneurs should be assured that it's okay not to jump on to immediately jump onto this bandwagon. I think there's that fear that, oh my God, my competitor is going to do this, right? It's like, oh, if I and I must do this, or he's going to
absolutely the worst reason to do it, right? Like, I mean,
right.
Like, follow.
Yeah, but I think that's the name of the game for a lot of things.
Yeah, this was a tweet, by the way, Ken, that I was seeing from Koopa.
Yep.
He says that if you're a creator, you need to pay attention to Web3. You don't need to go all in. I believe.
That's the one. Abhinav.
Okay. Simply be aware of what's happening and build a stronger community. And I think this is the important part, right? Is that you're building a community, and that's the part that matters right now. Like whether or not like Web3 is a good manifestation of that, right? I think is an entirely different thing, right? There's an interesting thing here, by the way, because someone asked the questions like, do you have something on the period of time that Web3 becomes really big, right? And he said 3 to 5 years, right? Like, and he says like, we're sort of in the MySpace era of crypto, right? And I definitely agree with that. I think like we are several years away, but we are certainly in a time frame where there will be lots of interesting and great experimentation, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, it's as we keep saying, like as we talk to people on the show, I mean, it's like the Wild West. Like there's so many. I mean, everyone's going after the low hanging fruit right now, but you but in like that 3 to 5 years, then you're going to start to see people really adapt and say, oh, okay, this is the potential for this, and then they start that they're once you get all the easy hits out, you're like, okay, let me think about where's the real money going to be, and all that type of thing. And one thing that from that tweet that you shared that's kind of fascinating is that word community, right? And I kind of know the answer, but it's also like, how is that word being redefined now? Because it's like community's been around for a while. Like the fact that Web3 is now a thing, it does not suggest that community has never been around. We've always had communities, right? I mean, your wife has done a phenomenal job building communities for a lot of enterprise companies and for others. Like we know a lot of people that do community management or something in that space. So, and they've been able to do it on their platforms, on these traditional platforms, the Facebooks, the YouTubes, and the Mighty Networks, and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering, it's like what is the word community doing a lot of heavy lifting here? Right? Just because it's like, oh, now we're going to be, if you're saying community, you have to say it has to be synonymous with Web3. I mean, it's like,
yes. So this is, I think, one of the beefs I have, and I think this tweet speaks to it. Right. That what we see happening is a lot of these concepts are being forcefully sort of colluded together, right? But they're building blocks that don't necessarily go in a certain order, right? Like, well, sorry, I take that back. I do think like you have to build a community as a function of many other things, right? Like it is likely the foundation. Now, below that community, though, is, I would argue, like CRM, right? Like you need to know who the people are, and then arguably you need some layer of like loyalty or compute or organizational metrics sort of happening in an ecosystem, right? Because like one of the challenges I think is like you could have a big pile of people, but how do you discern like active people versus inactive people, positive contributors versus negative contributors, right? Like there's all these like sort of factors, right? Like in someone's presence. It doesn't mean that you have a community, by the way. Like these are observable things with regardless of sort of like there being a community per se, because a community unto itself, I think, has all these unique attributes that exist on top of it, right? Like there's relationships, there's co-creation, there's collaboration. There's all these forces and vectors that are sort of at play in a well-run, well-organized, highly functioning community. But there's this sort of gradient of what a community is, right? Like, is a message board or a forum a community? Sure, to some degree, right? Like, but maybe it never extends past that, right?
But I think the word that you used, I think the word you used is key. The word evolution, right? I think because it's like, I think it's a little disingenuous for advocates of Web3, not to, and I don't hate Web3. I'm just saying it's like, and we're just, and maybe it's just splitting hairs, but I think it's slightly disingenuous to say like Web3 and community are synonymous with one another, because it's like, no, community has been around for a while. Communities have been around on message boards and on forums, on Reddit, and so on and so forth. Tradition, not like Web 1, Web 2, they've all been there. Like emails, it's just like now with Web3 with blockchain, you're kind of taking a little bit more ownership of it. I think it's like you can certainly have community. It just makes sure that you're not saying like, oh, now we've realized this nirvana of community. Like, no. Like, it is just a different format of community, right? It's just getting you closer to that promised land. You're never going to. This is not going to be a perfect solution. Web3 is not going to be a perfect solution for a community. I mean, it's probably going to get you damn near close, but don't assume that, it's like, oh, community has never been around for a while. And I'm not saying that people are saying it. I'm just, as people are thinking about, oh, we can finally build a community. It's like, no, you could always have had a community. This is just giving you a little bit more control over that community. But I mean, there's a lot. And if you have that decentralized, there's a lot more issues.
I don't even know if it's control, right? Like some of these tools are driving or diversifying control. Right. Like, in fact, so one of the things I was arguing sort of in the Discord, by the way, really looking forward to having Jenna on the show next week, was just that here, I feel like we went from Web 1 to Web 2. And then at the end of Web 2, let's say, like, which is now, right? Creators finally were like, hey, I can monetize, right? Like my audience. And so like one of the risks that I feel exists sort of in this just spectrum of things, and I've made this kind of case in the past, was that the 2.5 platforms, as I call them, right? Like the stuff like Zealous and the stuff like what all of our friends in our Discord and our Slack are creating, right? Before we move to sharing all of the pie with everybody, right? We haven't gotten to the point where the creators are standing on their own yet to actually have something to share. Right. And so that was sort of some of the risk I felt like exists, right? Which is that you have all these people who are like, I'm just trying to get to like where I could make $100 a month. Right. And then now it can feel like, I'm not saying this is a real thing per se, but it can feel like there's a pressure, right, to have to share with the community, right? Like, are you suddenly like a bad creator because you don't share your revenues with your audience, right? Like, and it's easy to imagine that sentiment starts to emerge, but missing the point that like these people are trying to do this for a living, and even getting to like a minimum wage full-time job is actually still a struggle for 95% of creators out there. Now, most of them, maybe not all of them are trying, right? Like, so fine, 60%, 50, 60%, right? Like, to me, that feels like, I don't know, like, I feel like there's a little bit of a tension here in what a lot of the talk around ownership, which I welcome, in varying degrees and in varying ways. I think part of what it's forcing is potentially this kind of pressure. Right. And I don't know what happens. Now, maybe there's more money that comes with more revenue that comes with like operating that way. Right. Like, but it's hard to know that for sure. Right. Like,
yeah, I think, well, it's it's funny we dive down this rabbit hole because, we're evolving. The thing with, I think what we talked about in the beginning, my understanding, my points have been specific to the builder, the entrepreneurs. But you raise up another good point, because what about the creators? Because this is not a B2C type of environment we're in anymore. I think we're in a B2B to C, a B2B to C type of thing, where you also have creators who are not necessarily builders, but they are technically entrepreneurs. So they need to find ways. Creators are very much like me. You're like, on one hand, you're the builder, you're the entrepreneur. I'm more the creator. Like, I'm producing content, I'm writing it, or I'm tweeting it, or whatever. And I'm having this problem of, I want to build a community around what I want to do. What do I have? What are my options? Now, I think there's on one hand, you can go with like, oh, I want to build a community. I can use like whatever tools YouTube has. I can use whatever tool Facebook has, and Reddit and Twitch or whatever. Because it's easy. There's somebody there's a big company that's done it at scale, that's stable, that can help me just cut to the chase and say, here's your mailing list, here's your users, here's your traffic, here's the network effects people are going to see. But then you get into the, oh my God, I got to constantly churn. I churn. I got to spit out content. But then it's like, I want to be able to own my stuff. And very similar to what Heather Ramirez and Tom Buck and Nicolina Moon, all these creators that we've had on the show have this same issue where like, okay, they don't necessarily want to chase that, right? They just want to be able to produce content and just interact with their 100 top fans. They don't want to chase the million, 2 million, 50 million, whatever number. So maybe decentralized is the way to go, but it's like, how do you get to that point? And is it necessarily that point? Because it seems like it's made for some, they may see like, for creators, they may see like, oh, decentralized is that jump, is that next chapter. And I just got to get there. And once I get there, all my promises are, I think it might be just like an oasis for them. Not the Ready Player One oasis. Actually, oasis is wrong. It may be a mirage for some. Because you're like, oh, this is going to solve all your problems. I'm going to jump in there and it's going to be great. And it's going to solve a problem. But then they're getting from point A to the finish line. They don't know. There's a lot of stuff they got to think about in between, and that's probably where they need like, okay, how do you get this to go from there to there, right? And it's like, how do you incorporate the blockchain or crypto? How do you do this, and how do you figure out like, are you going to get scammed by doing this? Should you be doing NFTs? Should you be doing rally coins? Should I be doing, so on and so? Like, what the hell's the point? Well, how do I find the best startup to help me figure this out without me getting like winding up in the same problem where Facebook owns my data and I can't extract it to really interact with Greg, with Arnold, with Peter, with Abhinav and Matt and all these people. Like, I want to be able to have that intimate conversation, So I don't know. I don't, there's certainly not an answer to like a clear answer to all this. I think this is just strategic thinking that everyone needs to think about.
I think that's a great point, Ken. I think that the multitude. So I think you're describing two important things, right? Like one, I think is that we're. Do you remember that movie Johnny Mnemonic?
Yes.
Right.
That is a good movie. Yes.
So it was like we're like overloading their buffers, right? With like, so
hit me.
On the one hand, you're having to become an entrepreneur in all of its pain and glory, right? Like you're onboarding all of these new skills. Well, even if you're not operating them, you sort of have to become familiar now with like a whole bunch of skills that were required to become an entrepreneur, right? Like, like from marketing to sales to operations to all the pieces in between, right? Then, of course, all of the product lines, et cetera, that you're further creating have their own unique skill sets. Like you want to make clothing, now you got to learn all about that business to be able to operate and fulfill it, right? So there's this one nugget of stuff, right? And I think one of the threads I had sort of touched on this, but I think like the longer one I did about ownership. But the second one, forget the entrepreneurship stuff, is that being a good community, like an organizer and a moderator and a host, is a whole different set of skills, right? And then there's the crypto part, right? Like, which is now not only like entrepreneurship and not only community, but also like a whole bunch of other like human things, like around like human, like organizational design, system design, economics, right? Like all these other forces sort of factored into sort of like operating crypto, right?
Right.
Or at least certainly if you're doing a token, right? Or an NFT, right? Like there may be other ways that you can like mitigate or minimize some of that. But either way, I do believe that onboarding all of this these new data sets and skills, and kind of like the Matrix, right? Like where he loads the cartridge, he's like, oh, you picked this up. Yeah, well, it just doesn't go that fast. And so now, which path is the best one, actually, I think is really interesting, because there are smart builders out there who are saying like, hey, I can help you do crypto now, like without having to learn all this stuff. Just like there's people who are like, hey, I can help you run how to operate your business now without having to learn all this stuff, right? Like that's what software and entrepreneurs and what we're good at is like sort of like eliminating and simplifying processes, right? So I think, that's where there's an interesting opportunity. Now, is that path is it truly like a serialized path? Like you have to do this, then you do this, then you do this. I would probably argue that probably yes, it's probably pretty serial. Like you probably shouldn't go out of order.
Yeah.
But smart builders, good builders, entrepreneurs out there will figure out shortcuts for you to do some of these things faster, right? Like if you think about this, right? Like look at what a Teespring does. Look at how much it removes from the process of being a t-shirt designer and producing stuff, right? Like you don't actually have to learn about like manufacturing and warehousing and supply chains and like, logistics or shipping and any other crap. You just go and tell them the stuff you want. And then your job is like largely being a marketer, right? For the product line that you're coming up with.
Yeah.
Same thing with website design and Squarespace or Webflow or any of these other tools, right? Like they cut out a bunch of stuff.
And I think that what you're saying is it sounds more of a case for Web 2.5, as opposed to a Web 3. Like and look, I think it depends on your skill level, right? And that's totally fine, because some people prefer to build to prefer off the shelf type software. They'll get the Dreamweavers or the Photoshops, or versus those that'll just do it themselves, right? It's like I prefer a WYSIWYG editor. Some people might prefer just opening up Notepad or a terminal and just, punching out code, right? I think the thing, and when for those that are creators that are maybe just starting out, that want to get into that space, I think a Web 2.5 approach might be, it might be like a Weebly, or it might be a Teespring, or something that kind of is in that decentralized, in that blockchain type of thing, but there's still a little bit of a centralized push, a platform for that, right? Where, I mean, it's a modicum of centralization, just to kind of really help to streamline everything, but you as the creator kind of maintain that type of approach. And then once you get to that point where you're like, look, I am good, I'm well versed in the entrepreneur type of space and blah blah blah, then I can go off and build my own platform, or I can use this more advanced platform and go off and do that. Like, I think it's like one, like, for example, you want to create a community off of off of the incumbent social platforms. You can go into Mighty, you can go into a bunch of the other things, and that could be very well a decentralized approach. Great. But then it's like, I want something a little bit where I, as a creator, get a little bit more, or have that.
And remember, Mighty's only the software, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not the hard part, right?
Yeah.
Like the hard part about you can set up Mighty. It's programming and planning and operating all the parts that happen inside of it. You can go stand up Circle or Mighty or any of these tools. It doesn't give you a community though, right? Like,
no, absolutely. But I think,
right?
It's that layer, that thing that's blocking you from saying, like, here's your access to community. There's like this thin piece of paper that's blocking you from actually communicating to them. And that is basically Mighty, or something to that, or a different type of platform.
Well, by the way, it's just like Substack. You sign up for Substack.
Right.
It doesn't give you the content. It just gives you the utilities to sort of deploy it, right?
Yeah.
This was the part that got me about Boss's article, though, where he makes these sort of predictions. He said that artists will find and build new audiences in Web3 that are separated from their existing fan base. This is already happening. Some existing fans will be onboarded to Web3 through artist activity. These will be early adopters. And then large proportions of the fan base will stay behind and be reunited in 2 to 5 years, probably by integrations with Web3. So I get, like, I don't disagree with this, I guess, right? Like, I think like this is probably a pretty pragmatic approach.
Yep.
I also don't know, however, that treating like it is a destination, like I you know what I mean? Like, I guess like these are multiple levels of unlocking access right now. Any one of your fans today with the right motivation can be like, I'll figure out how to buy an NFT, right? Like, or I'll figure out how to buy your social token, or you use the right platform for issuing your tokens and they can use a credit card, and any number of all of your fans can participate like right now. Right. Like, so like, I sort of understand sort of like the serialized nature that he describes here, but I don't know that that this is necessarily how it has to go.
I think there's going to be a lot. So I agree wholeheartedly with point three of his prediction. Large proportions of fan bases will stay behind and be reunited in 2 to 5 years. I don't disagree with points 1 and 2, but with the caveat that there has to be there's a steep learning curve when it gets to Web 3. Because this is one of those things where you would think that if you build it, they will come. That's true, except the learning curve to get there. And let's take this for Martin's post here for as specifically with the music industry. How many people that are maybe listening to like a Lady Gaga or an up and comer, right, or a new discovery, who's like, hey, I want to really get ahead of, I want to really evangelize to my fan base, and so I'm going to go all Web3. That's great for them to monetize and really hone that community. But how many of those people, those listeners, are going to be super well versed into doing this? Case in point, I'm not necessarily super smart when it comes to tech, right? But I'm not like the dumbest brick in dumbest tool in the shed. But when it comes to figuring out how to do to set up my coin, my crypto wallet, and to buy an NFT, it was just super confounding for me, right? And so I think if there was some way that these creators or builders or whoever is running these type of programs offers that educational aspect, because I think it's like you're shooting to the moon saying, hey, crypto, blockchain, decentralized, it's going to be the new internet. Great. You're already up here. You're at 25,000 feet. People are down here on the ground. Like, I don't know how to get to there. How do you bridge that gap and help me get, buy this NFT to support you? You can't just be like, all right, guys, meet me at this place. And then you zoom off. You're like, but I have no mode of transportation. How do I, you want me to walk there?
Yeah.
It's like,
he
how
does
do I
mention,
get
by
there?
the way, and he does talk about this. Should artists worry about onboarding all their fans to Web3? And his reply is, it's a waste of time. Be inclusive in your communication. Never throw your fans under a bus. However, as an artist, your role is to create art, to create narrative, to build worlds. Tech platforms have a much stronger economic incentive to improve the user experience so that it's easier for people to use their tools. They have far more control over it too. You should worry about finding and building audience. Now, that was sort of the point I was making earlier about sort of like where technology can short circuit processes and make them easier, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say though, I think we are evolving out of where I don't think creators are afforded the luxury of only defining themselves as their role to create art, to create narrative, and to build worlds, right? You have to also build a living, right? And you have to build a business potentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now whether or not you are directly manifesting those things with your own hands, that's a separate matter. But this is where I think we really do need to, here's the thing. If you move to an ownership economy, everyone becomes an investor, everyone becomes an owner, and all of these skills need to be owned by everybody, not even just by the creator, right? So is it should I be putting my hour of free time into supporting Ken's channel, or should I be putting it into supporting Greg's channel, right? Those are investments of your time, right? And there's economics, underlying economics, and there's predictions and all kinds of other things involved now, sort of in that equation.
Yeah, no, and I think that's you're entirely right. I think the thing though, the thing here is, I think creators and builders, they are, as they move into this decentralized thinking, Web3, hey, community, again, it's that, you build it, they come, and you're automatically there, all your problems will be solved. That's not the case, because I think if you create a community on Facebook, you want to handle payments, you want to handle buying stuff, and to what Martin has in here, what you said earlier, these platforms, incumbent platforms, have already figured out the user experience. They already know that stuff, right? It's easy for you to facilitate payments and transactions and to interact with one another. If you're going decentralized, you're going to have a hodgepodge of different services, right? So you're not going to be able to control it. So if you're a musician, it's like, hey, buy my NFT. Where are you posting your? Okay, one, you have to tell people, where are you posting your NFTs? OpenSea, Coinbase, Twitter, blah blah blah. Then you got to figure out, okay, which of the crypto wallets are going to support them, right? Because I think if you're using Coinbase, you can't. It doesn't work well with OpenSea NFT for some reason. Like, I think when I had to do it, I had to do like a Meta wallet or something like that. I don't know. So, like, there's compatibility issues at play that you have to educate, because these are not your platforms. These are not something, so you would have to tell people. And I think you kind of have that issue now, because you're like, oh, if you're going to post, you have your merchandise on Shopify, you have your music on SoundCloud or on Spotify or Anchor, or you download this and this. So you're always all over the place. I know people want to have that be and have all their work kind of really centralized in their own little universe. But the reality is, the internet, you're going to have multiple properties, right? You're not going to have this dream home on the internet. You're going to be renting a lot of space. And I think it's a lot easier, and it's the user experience, that under the educational gap is a lot smaller on Web 2 as it is versus on Web 3. Web 3 has this huge learning gap. And there's a lot more work that needs to be done, as opposed to just immediately jumping over the fence and saying, hey, Web 3, I am all in. You've left a bunch of people behind. And you can be like, oh, well, whatever. I have like 1 million followers and 10% are there. That's great. How many of those 10% are really your top 100 fans, right? Which are your most fervent fans? If your most fervent fans are the ones that are still stuck in that in that grassy area, that won't catch up to you for 2 to 5 years, you've lost, right? You have to bring them along, because there's people that to 10% that may have jumped over, and to 10% is completely an arbitrary percentage. I just pulled it out of my butt, but it's like that's okay. We're done. You're like, oh, now you got to. Then where are you? Right? You've lost your passionate fans. So like Web3, sure, go like and explore Web3, but make sure you are aware of what's going on, and you aren't leaving people behind.
Yeah. Now, he does also touch, by the way, on what he calls Web 2 legacy fan bases. He says, keep them in the loop, show them what you're working on, introduce them to communities you're a part of, Twitter Spaces or Discord. So I do believe that the Discord phenomena, Twitter Spaces, which is a little more ad hoc, these are creating some of these intermediary stepping stones to sort of more full-fledged, monetized communities, let's say, right? And those that are ready will come along, if not now, then later. Channel your energy into your own future. You can't bring the entire past with you. I agree with that. I think it's a little, to me, the framing, I don't think about it about bringing everyone along. I think about it more probably as identifying the more engaged, right? Like, so, I don't look at it as something lost. I think it is something gained, I guess, right? Like, so it's not like you're losing this huge chunk of your audience that didn't come. I think what you're doing is identifying the right people to come, right? And so, that would probably be my optimistic look at it, as opposed to sort of like, oh, I had 1 million subs, but I only have 1,000 over here. Well, guess what? That 1,000 is the one that's going to pay you $100,000 a year, right? Yep. Like, so what do you care about that other, like the people who weren't paying you anything, right? Or that you weren't able to earn anything together with, right? He does point out collecting email addresses and phone numbers. Obviously, I think super important, right? So yeah, I do see this happening. I like that he was talking about this, because their focus is obviously on music, but I think a lot of this is super relevant to sort of everybody else.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and kind of case in point, it's like, as you're talking about that, I shared a link on our the Creator Economy Twitter account yesterday. There's a streamer, Ludwig Argren. So he actually broke a record. He's a gamer that broke the all-time Twitch sub record. because he had a subathon this year.
Hmm.
So he racked up a bunch of new subscribers. Anyways, so he signed an exclusive deal with YouTube Gaming. So he's basically abandoning
right.
3.1 million followers on Twitch to go to YouTube. But I think so. At first glance, you're like, oh my God, like you just dropped 3.1 million. And you're assuming that how many of those 3.1 million will, one, and have a YouTube account, and two, will convert to be a subscriber. Probably a decent amount of that 3.1 million. So, but here's the thing, like, but then you read further into this article, Ludwig already has let's say rounding up 2.1 million of subscribers onto his YouTube Gaming, right? So like he already has a good, but I think that's the point here is like to what you're saying with Martin with that post that we're just talking about, you know, and are kind of what you started off early on is like people are leaving, you know, people will leave these platforms, but you're leaving people behind, right? Yeah, that one right there. So like I think it's like I can leave, like I can build up like I have a 17,000 followers on Twitter, on my Twitter account. Say I decide, all right, you know what, I'm done. I'm just going to go all in on, you know, Instagram or Snapchat, or I'm just going on my Substack. I'm losing access to that 17,000 followers, right? Assuming that like how many of them are actually actively following me or whatever, I don't know. But I lose access to, because there's no way to extract that information to there's no data portability for me to extract that information and put it elsewhere. So that's I guess that's the rationale here. I wonder, you know, like, and I guess that's a reason to incorporate Web3 type features into this type of thing, if you can, you know, be able to extract it and to maintain those communications. But I also wonder is like how many people are just more about, I like your content, I like your platform, I just don't really like you that much, right? So they'll like, I'm not going to follow you to YouTube, or I'm not going to follow you to like, or I'm not going to follow you to Facebook or Instagram because one, I hate those platforms, right?
Yeah, look, it takes a strong pull, right? So years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I started following this guy CJ. He's a really good developer, but he's really good at teaching people how to like learn how to code or write code on YouTube. And he used to do live streams and he did videos. Then he's decided to move to Twitch. And literally the reason I opened my Twitch account was because I like went over there to continue to watch the content, right? And I think like, because I'm not a gamer, so like I just never had any reason to be on Twitch. And then it was like a non-gamer actually that brought me over to Twitch, right?
Right.
And I think like that's the point. Like if you're not delivering something that is super high value, like a platform switch is really hard, right? Like,
yeah.
And then a platform switch where you might have to like spend money. So for example, like switching to Web3, like wallets, tokens, all these other things, right? Like that also is a heavy lift, right? Or, hey, come over, but then I need to like farm out a bunch of work to you. That sounds like an even more horrible thing, right? Like for some people, for a very casual user versus someone's like, shit, I always wondered how you make these videos. Like I could be part of that. I could be like a moderator. I could help. I could edit. I could like review the captions. I could translate it to a different language. Like think about all the number of tasks that, as someone maybe who's curious about the space and wants to get into it, or like a fan of the community and wants to help other people or expand it. These are all good, strong motivators, but you do have to make them. You have to come up with them, right? Like you have to enable them, right, in your ecosystem for it to actually work and be successful.
Yeah, no, you're right. So, I mean, it's like, I think there's, I wonder though, it's like, can you go all in? Is it necessarily an all in, or is it a, do you not go all in, right? With Web3 versus Web2.
Speaking about all in, this dude's got some trouble with all in right now, right?
Parag. Well, that's a. Well, too bad you're on.
Here's the thing: no one should be all in. Most likely, it should just be a tool in the toolbox of it's an arrow in the quiver of tools that you can use to help yourself grow and establish yourself. There are likely a select few, would be my guess, right? Who could change their fortunes in fundamental ways now, right? Like by embracing like crypto and whatnot. I think there are some people who likely could do well now. Can you do well with crypto now from a community point of view? I don't know. Like, I think that's there, but I just think that a lot of the big numbers we hear around community tend to be in this like sort of speculative, some often in the art side of the house, not necessarily in sort of the utility side of it yet, right? Like there's no social token owners like blowing up and making millions of dollars and then getting all this liquidity that lets them like then say, see you guys, right? Like,
but I think that there's a there's more of, if anything, if I've learned anything, or I've thought I learned anything, is the Constitution DAO, right? If that's taught me anything, is there's a risk of high financial fees associated with doing these type of plays. And maybe I'm conflating crypto in its various forms, but you look at rally tokens versus, doing ETH, doing a DAO, doing, whether you're doing Solana or your crypto, whatever, like if you're doing cryptocurrency in general, if you are a builder, if you are a creator and you want people to make those type of transactions, there are added fees associated with, and they can vary, and it's much worse and it could be much worse and higher than you would get like surprise fees on your phone bill from back in the day, right? It's like, oh my God, how did I get charged, all these different hidden fees? Like, it's largely attributed to the gas fees, right? In terms of minting and everything like that. So I think when you're thinking about Web3, maybe you don't think about it from a cryptocurrency standpoint, but you think about it from the asset standpoint and the value, the additional benefits that are derived from said value. And that could be from rally tokens, right? Based on the different rewards. Like, hey, if you're a holder of AMA, if you have X amount of AMA, you can, guest host, you can, you're entered into you can gain access to our Slack channel or whatever, right? You can get all these different added value. You don't actually have to, no purchase is necessary, right? I think that's key. You hold on to, and you look at what we talked about with previous guests with like NFTs, the value of NFTs, because you can do like, I can buy this, art, this NFT, and then that gives me access to an exclusive membership club, or it gives me access to download new music or blah, blah, blah. Like, you don't actually have to make an additional purchase and risk, like, because it's like, oh, it's going to cost you 0.5 ETH. No, that's the base. There's a tax on top of that being your gas. And it could realistically be double that depending on when you make that purchase. And I think it's, and I think with the creators, the organizers of said community, they need to be aware. It's like, oh, you can't just have it like, oh, buy this, or buy, it'll cost, pay this cryptocurrency between this hour and this hour. It's like, you realize you need to make it accessible for a lot of people, so that, because they can't necessarily afford the gas tax, right? Because I certainly can't do that. It's like, you want me to.
There are changes coming, I think, obviously, right? Like, obviously, the ETH2 and some of these other things, I think maybe
right
fixes
well, yes.
in a way.
I think
Solana or yes, there are ways to fix some of this stuff for sure.
Yeah, but I think those are some considerations if you're going into the cryptocurrency type of space, is to think about those type of things, as opposed to just saying, hey, I want to go into, we're all in on Solana, we're all in on Bitcoin, we're all in on Dogecoin or Shiba Inu or ETH. Like, this is, like, you think about how this plays out, because you might look like, hey, you're cool, like your company now supports this. But if people are reluctant to make those purchases because of the gas fees or whatever hidden costs that you don't fully explain or haven't accounted for, you've kind of really lost out. Like, then they'll be like, okay, we're just going to wait until you figure this out, and then I'll come in at 2 to 5 years from now. or I'll go off somewhere else and who might have might have a better deal.
And I do think like, there's good reason for creators to maybe look at like alternatives. Like our approach is actually like a fiat and then crypto sort of scenario, right? And I think like, look, if you have if you have an audience that is like already invested in crypto and has like a bunch of it, they're swinging around in a bunch of it, that's one thing, right? But to your point about the fees and the gas and some of these other things, I think like, would you rather $200 go to like this being preserved in the blockchain, or would you rather $200 come to you, right? Like,
yeah.
And I think you can do a lot more for yourself potentially by not having, all of those things necessarily associated with you, like out of the box, right?
Yeah. No, you're right. So, but I think we're very much early stages of all of this, right? And I think we're going to see a lot more in 2022 as a new year hits. You'll see a lot more of this type of a lot more crypto or Web3 innovation. Actually, it's not really crypto anymore. It is Web3 because that's more all encompassing. I'm looking forward to seeing what people do with NFTs and outside of and other Web3 stuff outside of the currency type of space. So the true blockchain type of stuff, like where is that real innovation? How is that supporting creators and builders? And when we have more people on the show, we'll have that conversation. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Well, definitely been a good convo. I think like, lots of this stuff is super relevant right now. And I think, we just need more people to be, I think just having the honest conversation around it, obviously, because like, here's the reality. Like, I think like there's good reason to be exuberant here, but like what we need to make sure is happening is just that people are not being sold something that's not going to work for them, right?
Yeah.
And
is there more control? Is the onus shifting, right? Because if a company,
control comes with the price, right? Yeah.
Right.
So,
is the like if I'm a company, if I'm an incumbent company that's Web2, I'm like, oh, let me embrace Web3. Is that a sign that's saying that the control, that more of the essence of control moves away from you as the builder to the creator, right? To the user. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's kind of it's just a different perspective.
Yeah, I think the 2.5 people, like me and Arnold and lots of others in our group and in the ecosystem, we embrace the idea of being like a layer to help that creator layer, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously it's not that we're not trying to create a business, like obviously we are, but I think like we understand that we can build something bigger by supporting them getting bigger, right? Like as opposed to we should prevent them from being successful, right? Like or we should like somehow insert ourselves into the process of them being successful so that we can be more successful, which I think is what the Web 2 pathway was. And by the way, there was nothing wrong with that, right? Like back, like when you're starting a Facebook, it was really expensive to like operate a server. Like it cost thousands of dollars, not like $8 a month, right? Engineers like had to create all of the things that we rely on now, right? Like it was, all this stuff was formed in that time. And so, those business models were the models that were evolving, that like were a short evolution from like the business models that were dominant at the time. And by the way, there's nothing to say that creators as platforms won't be adopting all of the exact same thing. They already do it. Like they do advertising, they do sponsorships, they do direct transactions, they do goods and wares and all these other things. So all these pieces are the same, right? like we shouldn't be looking at how to throw them out. Now, what we are looking at is how to help everyone participate in the upside, right? And I think that's where this has to go.
Yeah. Cool. Wow. Talked about, usually office hours run for like 30 minutes. Now we're about an hour.
Yeah. Well, two of us, so double the length. So
This is
All
what
right,
happens when I jump on a show. It's like,
I'm probably gonna do a co-working session actually. So I'll probably open up a different room just for everyone to hang out. We won't stream that one, but if you are interested, feel free to DM Ken or I or whatever, and we'll get you the link if you want to join us. All righty.
cool.
Be well.
All right.
Bye.
Yeah.